The bell above the diner door jingled as Marcus stepped inside, letting in a gust of cold morning air that swept through the small room. The smell of coffee, bacon grease, and old vinyl filled his lungs, and for a moment, it felt almost peaceful, like one of those forgotten roadside spots from a postcard. He'd been driving since dawn, his truck heavy with silence, and this was the first stop that felt alive. He moved with the unhurried steadiness of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on being noticed. Still, people noticed him. They always did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands roughened from years of training and work, skin glistening faintly with the cold outside. His eyes, dark and watchful, scanned the room the way they used to scan new terrain overseas, out of habit, not fear. A couple in the booth near the window stopped mid-conversation when he walked past. The waitress behind the counter offered a polite smile that faltered slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to be friendly or cautious. Marcus just nodded. He didn't blame her. Small towns carried long memories and short tempers. He slid into a corner booth, back against the wall, where he could see the entrance. Old instincts. The laminated menu was sticky at the edges. He flipped through it anyway, half reading, half watching the morning unfold. The hum of the old ceiling fan. The hiss of the grill. A radio playing softly. Something country, the kind of song that felt like dust and distance. The waitress came over, notepad in hand, her smile returning now that she'd decided he looked more tired than threatening. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," Marcus said, his voice deep but even, like a low note on a cello. "Breakfast special." He nodded again. He wasn't picky. She poured the coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. The first sip grounded him. It wasn't good coffee. Burnt, watery, but it reminded him of late shifts on base, the quiet hours between drills when the world was still and his mind finally stopped racing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the diner's old neon sign. A truck rumbled past on the road, splashing through a puddle left from last night's rain. Inside, conversation resumed in low murmurs. He caught a few glances his way, curious, not yet hostile, and he let them slide off him like rain on metal. He'd learned long ago that silence was its own kind of armor. It gave people space to see what they wanted to see, sometimes that was safer. His breakfast arrived, eggs, toast, sausage, all a little too greasy, and he ate slowly, methodically. The food was unremarkable, but it felt good to have something warm in his stomach. He was halfway through when the bell above the door jingled again, sharper this time. The sound shifted the rhythm of the room. 3 men walked in together, boots heavy on the tile, jackets scuffed from work or maybe just neglect. They were laughing about something, a joke Marcus didn't catch, but when they saw him, the laughter quieted. He didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. He could feel their eyes on him, the same weight he'd felt before in places far more dangerous than this. There was a pattern to moments like these. A glance, a whisper, a test. The waitress stiffened a little behind the counter, her pen frozen over an order pad. Marcus saw it in the reflection on the window, her shoulders tensing, her gaze darting toward him, then away. He took another sip of coffee. Slow, steady. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of the small storms that never seemed to pass, tired of having to measure every breath to keep the peace. But he stayed still. That was his strength. Stillness, patience. The men moved toward a booth on the other side of the diner, still talking, still laughing, though now it had an edge to it. Marcus didn't react. He cut into his sausage, the knife scraping softly against the plate. His reflection stared back at him from the chrome napkin holder, calm, unreadable, immovable. For now, that was enough. He'd been in rooms like this all his life, rooms where peace was a thin layer over something raw and restless. But if there was one thing he knew better than anyone, it was how to wait. And as the laughter from across the room grew louder, he knew he might have to. The laughter from the other booth grew louder, spilling across the quiet diner like oil over water. Marcus stayed still, eyes lowered to his plate, though his hearing sharpened instinctively. Years in uniform had trained him to detect changes in tone, the subtle shift from humor to hostility. This was that shift. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just kept cutting into his toast, slow and deliberate, while his mind stayed alert. One of the men stood up. Marcus saw his reflection in the chrome edge of the napkin holder, tall, wiry, with the kind of restless energy that came from needing to prove something. The man leaned over the counter to say something to the waitress, who nodded nervously and tried to keep her voice even. Whatever he said made her uncomfortable. Marcus noticed the way her hand trembled slightly as she filled another coffee pot. He glanced up then, just once, and their eyes met. Hers flicked toward the group, then back to him, a silent warning, or maybe just an apology for what might come next. He gave her a small nod, letting her know it was fine. He'd been through worse. The man sauntered closer, pretending to look at the jukebox near Marcus's booth. The jukebox was broken, hadn't worked in years, but that didn't matter. Marcus watched him out of the corner of his eye. The man's reflection wavered faintly in the coffee's surface, his stance wide, his chin lifted in the practiced arrogance of someone trying to fill a silence he didn't understand. "Morning," the man said finally. His tone carried that forced casualness that tried too hard. Marcus looked up, offered a small nod. "Morning. You from around here?" "No," Marcus said simply. The man smirked, like that answer had confirmed something for him. "Didn't think so. Not many folks just passing through this part of town." Marcus set his fork down, his movements slow, deliberate. "Just stopping for breakfast," another one of the men called from across the diner. "Hey, leave him alone, Eddie. Let the man eat." The way he said it wasn't really a defense, more a tease, a way of adding pressure. Eddie grinned without humor. "Just being friendly," he said, though the weight of the words suggested otherwise. Marcus didn't rise to it. He reached for his coffee, his fingers steady, the ceramic mug warm in his hand. He took another sip, letting silence fill the space between them until the man shifted uncomfortably. Silence was something Marcus had always used like a weapon, not to intimidate, but to hold ground without ever lifting a hand. Finally, Eddie gave a short laugh. "All right, big guy, didn't mean nothing by it." Marcus inclined his head once more, not breaking eye contact this time. The message was clear enough. Eddie returned to his booth, but the tension didn't leave the room. It hung there, thick and invisible, like humidity before a storm. The waitress came by a few minutes later. Her hands were steadier now, though her voice was soft. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated. "They come in sometimes after the mill closes. Mostly talk." "Mostly." Marcus gave a small, reassuring smile. "I'm just passing through." She nodded and walked away, but not before glancing toward the group again. The men had gone back to their beers and half-eaten sandwiches, talking too loud, glancing over too often. Marcus could feel it, the need for attention, for reaction. He'd seen that same need in young recruits before their first mission, the way they'd puff up, eager to test their courage against the unknown. He took a slow breath, grounding himself in the small details, the ticking clock above the door, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the soft rustle of napkins as the waitress cleaned another table. Everything ordinary, everything fragile. He checked the time. 11:37. He planned to finish his meal, pay, and leave without incident. That was the goal, always had been. But peace, he knew, was never something you could count on. When he looked up again, Eddie was watching him. Not smiling this time, just watching, as if trying to decide what kind of man he was dealing with. Marcus didn't hold his gaze for long. He'd learned that attention was currency, give too much of it, and someone always wanted more. He folded his napkin, set it neatly beside his plate, and leaned back against the booth. Calm, centered, ready, if it came to that. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, the kind of hollow sound that made the whole building seem to breathe. Inside, the air went still, too still. Marcus didn't know what would happen next, but his pulse stayed steady. Because whatever came, he'd been there before. And if there was one thing he'd learned from all those years in the service, it was that sometimes, the hardest battles weren't fought overseas. Sometimes, they were fought over a cup of coffee in a quiet diner, where patience, restraint, and quiet strength could say more than any show of force ever could. The moment stretched thin in the diner, quiet enough that Marcus could hear the faint hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter and the soft scratch of the waitress's shoes as she shifted uneasily. The air had that charged stillness that came right before something broke. He'd felt it before, in alleyways halfway across the world, in barracks just before the alarms went off. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Eddie stood again. This time, there was no pretense of friendliness. His chair scraped back against the tile, loud and harsh. The other two men exchanged glances, one smirking, the other uncertain, like he wasn't sure if things had gone too far already. Marcus didn't move. He just looked up, eyes calm, expression unreadable, posture still but coiled in quiet readiness. Eddie walked over slowly, hands loose at his sides, shoulders rolling. "You military or something?" he asked, stopping just short of Marcus's table. Marcus tilted his head slightly, voice steady. "Used to be. Thought so," Eddie said. "You've got that look." "What look is that?" Eddie's grin twitched. "The kind that thinks he's better than everyone else." Marcus set his cup down. The soft clink of porcelain against the table seemed to echo louder than it should have. He looked at the man for a long moment, and then, very quietly, said, "No. Just the kind that's seen what happens when people forget how to be decent." That answer landed heavier than expected. For a second, Eddie didn't seem to know what to do with it. His friend stopped pretending to talk. Even the waitress froze mid-motion with the coffee pot half raised. Marcus stood up, not quickly. No sudden movement, no challenge in it. But when he rose, it was like the whole diner seemed smaller, as if the space around him wasn't built to contain that much calm authority. He didn't square his shoulders or raise his voice. He just looked at Eddie, the way a man might look at someone on the edge of doing something foolish. "You don't want to do this," Marcus said. Eddie gave a short, forced laugh, trying to recover his footing. "Do what?" "I'm just talking." "Then keep it that way," Marcus said, tone firm but even. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Eddie's smirk faltered. There was something in Marcus's eyes, not anger, not threat, something steadier, older. A weight that came from years of discipline and loss. The kind of look that made a man realize, without being told, that he'd already crossed a line. One of the other men finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Come on, Eddie, sit down." Eddie hesitated, still holding Marcus's gaze, but the fight drained out of him as quickly as it had built. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked back to his booth. The sound of his boots on the tile was loud, but it carried something different now, not power, but retreat. The diner stayed silent even after he sat down. The waitress exhaled softly, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Marcus remained standing for another moment, then calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and set them under his coffee cup. "Keep the change," he said quietly to the waitress. She nodded, her eyes glistening just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave her a small smile. "You've got a good place here. Don't let people ruin it." Then he turned toward the door. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, measured, the same way he'd walked through a dozen other uncertain moments in his life. As he reached for the handle, he paused, looking back once more. The three men sat in uneasy silence, eyes down. For a brief second, Eddie met his gaze again, but this time there was no defiance in it, just something like shame. Marcus gave a small nod. "Everybody's got a choice," he said softly. "Even now." And then he stepped outside into the morning light. The cold air hit his face, crisp and clean. He drew in a long breath and looked out at the horizon where the road stretched on, endless and open. Behind him, through the diner's window, he saw the waitress moving again, wiping down the counter, restoring the rhythm of normal life. The world kept turning, like it always did. Marcus walked to his truck, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. He'd done what he came to do. Not just finish breakfast, but remind that small, forgotten place that respect didn't need to shout to be heard. As he started the engine, he let out a quiet laugh, barely more than a breath. The kind of laugh that came not from amusement, but from relief. There had been a time, not long ago, when he might have handled things differently, faster, harder. But the years had taught him that real strength wasn't about how much force a man could use. It was about how much he could choose not to. The diner faded in his rearview mirror as he drove off down the empty road, sunlight breaking through the clouds in thin golden lines. Another day, another quiet victory, unseen, uncelebrated, but enough.